Hey everyone, and welcome as we continue our study through the New Testament Gospels, looking at the 250 events in the life of Jesus. And today we're looking at Jesus. Some versions call this the walk to Emmaus. Others put the title of Jesus appearing to two believers traveling on the road. The walk to Emmaus is easier to say, but I went along with this passage. Now, this is a longer section, but I am going to read through most of this because I do think it's important to look at some of the details of this. I'm not 100% sure why this one's in there, but I appreciate it because these two guys I think are extremely blessed, and it's interesting what they learned and what they saw. So let's go. We'll go through this real quick. And so um, again, so after yesterday, the religious leaders they bribed the guards, and so then next we see this, and this comes from Luke. Mark 16 briefly mentions it, but Luke covers it in great detail. So starting in verse 13 of Luke 24, it says, "The same day, two of Jesus' followers were walking in the village of to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them, but God kept them from recognizing him. He asked, 'What are you discussing so intently as you walk along?' They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, 'You must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all these things that have happened there the last few days.'" He's basically saying, "Are you living under a rock?" "What things?" Jesus asked. "The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth," they said. "He was a prophet who did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see him, and sure enough, his body was gone, just as the woman had said. Then Jesus said to them, 'You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe what all the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering the glory?' Then Jesus took them, and I love this part, verse 27. I would have loved to have gotten this teaching. It's, and it would have taken them a while. Obviously, they're walking 7 miles, so it would have taken a little while to do it. He said, "Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all the scriptures these things, the things concerning himself." I mean, you're learning from the best teacher you can on this stuff, and that would have been awesome. By the time they were nearing Emmaus, and at the end of the journey, Jesus acted as if he were going on, but they begged him, "Stay the night with us, since it's getting late." So he went home with them. As they sat down to eat, he took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were open and they recognized him. And at that moment he disappeared. That would have been an experience. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And you know it would have. Man, you know it would have. And within the hour they were back on their way to Jerusalem. There they found the 11 disciples and the others who had gathered with him, and who said, "The Lord has really risen." He appeared to Peter as well. And so we see that. So, obviously here, the news about Jesus' crucifixion had spread throughout Jerusalem. It was a Passover week. Jews visiting the city all over the Roman Empire knew about his death, right? This wasn't a small event that only affected the disciples. The whole nation, right, was interested in this. And so these followers, right, they had been counting on Jesus to redeem Israel, just like everyone else had, and that is to rescue them from their enemies, to rescue them from Rome and kick Rome out of Jerusalem. But and most Jews believed that the Old Testament prophecies pointed to a military and political Messiah. They did not realize that the Messiah that the Messiah was going to come was going to be a spiritual, was going to create a spiritual kingdom, right? And they also didn't realize that the Messiah had to come and redeem people from the slavery to sin. That was the thing. They're thinking, "Oh, he's going to redeem us from the slavery of these horrible captors and all that stuff." No, it was to redeem them from the slavery of sin. And so when Jesus died, they lost all hope. They thought everything was lost, and they just thought, well, he must have been a false prophet. They didn't understand that Jesus's death offered the greatest possible hope to them. They didn't quite gather that. They didn't quite understand that yet. And so, right, these followers, they knew the tomb was empty, but they didn't understand Jesus had risen, and they were still filled with sadness. They didn't believe or get the idea that he had risen from the dead. And so, even though these Jewish men would have known the biblical prophecies well, they failed to understand, right, that Christ's suffering was his path to go to glory, and they just didn't get that. And so they didn't understand. They couldn't understand why God did not intervene to save Jesus from the cross, and so that made them not understand, not believe that Jesus was the Messiah. And so Jesus sits down and goes through the entire New Testament or Old Testament with them, right? And so he would have been gone from the promising of in Genesis through the suffering that we see in Isaiah, all the way through Zechariah, and then the message of the covenant in Malachi. And so Jesus introduced these guys to these disciples to the Old Testament. And what we see, if we study the Old Testament, that Christ is threaded and woven throughout all the scriptures, right? And he's the central theme that binds everything together. If you pay attention and you read it and you understand it, you realize that the whole Old Testament, and then obviously the whole New Testament, is all about Jesus. The whole thing, all of it's all about Jesus, and it all points to Jesus, and all tells us about Jesus. And so, Jesus would have sat and spent the time going through on all this. And there would have probably been several key passages that Jesus would have focused on: Genesis 3, and chapter 12, Psalms 22, 69, 110, Isaiah 53, and you can write these down: Jeremiah 31, Zechariah 9, Zechariah 13, Malachi 3. That's just a few of them that he probably would have gone through and taught. And I would have loved to have been able to sit down and listen to that teaching and take all the notes on that. Man, I wish we had just a book of Jesus teaching that, right? A whole just gospel on that. But we get most of it right through I guess we do in a sense. We get most of it through the writing of Paul's and some of the other apostles and disciples. And so we do have it, but that I would have loved to just have that specific teaching recorded on, someone there to record that one and put that one on YouTube, right? But it didn't work that way. And so, but we still, man, those two guys were blessed to get that. And so, um, we get this appearance, right? And there's no other description. It's not described any further in the gospel. So this is Luke's the only one that describes us this way. But we do see the Peter, right? The appearance of Jesus to Peter. We don't get that described. Jesus showed individual concern for Peter. We see that he apparently appeared to Peter individually, but that's not recorded. It's recorded. This is all the detail we have of it. Um, Paul mentions that Jesus appeared to Jesus alone. That's in 1 Corinthians 15:5. Jesus showed individual concern for Peter because Peter felt completely unworthy after denying his Lord, right? And that's the difference. We've talked about the difference between Peter and Judas, right? Judas obviously showed remorse. He felt horrible for what he did. He had let greed take over. Some scholars believe there were some other motives behind it, trying to kickstart his overtaking of Rome, kicking Rome out and all that kind of stuff, kickstarting of his kingdom. But Judas went and killed himself instead of coming back and or sticking around, right? He felt horrible for what he did. Peter felt horrible for what he did. But Peter stuck around, and Peter repented, and that's the big difference. And so and Jesus approached him and forgave him, and that's the awesome thing to see. And soon we're going to see that when you read through Acts, right, the beginning of Acts 2, you see that Peter is used to build the church. Peter is a key, fundamental piece in building the Church of Christ. And so what we see here, right, is Jesus appearing to these two guys, and it's cool because he records the name of one of them, And I'm sure Luke probably, because Luke did an in-depth study of this. Luke probably sat down, interviewed this guy, and talked to him. He was able to put his name in it, and that's the awesome thing about this. Like, this is what I like about Luke, because Luke is a doctor from an outside perspective. He wasn't one of the original 12, but he came and he did a study on this, and he interviewed and and he researched everyone that was part of this ministry, and he wrote about it. And so this guy, these two guys, I don't know about maybe both of them, but he probably at least interviewed Cleopas, who he mentioned. And so that's awesome to see that, this guy would have been like, yeah, if Luke was making this up, that guy would be like, yeah, well, this didn't happen. We didn't, I didn't have, no, this didn't happen. No, he interviewed the guy, talked to the people who it happened to. And so that's the awesome thing to see about that. And so we received this recording this and Luke of it and how it played out. And so it's wonderful to see, you know, Jesus went in, going and appearing to people and talking to people, and we're going to see a little bit more of that next week. And so, as always, I appreciate everyone for watching and following along, and I hope these have been helpful. Tomorrow, we move into the very last week of this study. We have 7 more lessons left, and then we'll go into some more weekly stuff, I think, more other than daily. But as I've always said, I really appreciate everyone who's followed along, watched this far. If you're new to this, go back. We've created a playlist for this. You can go back and watch all the videos, and I hope it's beneficial and helps you out. And if it has been, share it with people and get other people to watch it as well. But I do appreciate everyone for following along. If you haven't subscribed to the channel so you can keep up with everything we got going on. And as always, I appreciate everyone.